Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
Hello, and welcome to the Women's Roundtable podcast, powered by the Think Factory, where we learn how women think big and grow their business. My name is Susan Kleiner, and I'm a partner with Outside General Counsel Solutions, and I'm the host of today's episode. I'm happy to have here with me today Anne Collier. She's got her JD, her MPP, and she's a professional certified coach and the CEO of Arudia, a firm dedicated to improving culture, collaboration, and communication. Anne spent 11 years, I think, in a legal career, and then turned to her true calling, acting as a leadership coach. Anne and her team work with clients in a range of fields, including legal, behavioral health, healthcare, corporations, governments, and nonprofits. She's a published author and an experienced keynote speaker, and she's certified in over a dozen proven assessment tools, including the Actualized Leader Profile and KAI, which measures problem-solving style. Anne is enthusiastic about everything that she does inside and outside of work, and we are enthusiastic to have her here with us today. So welcome, Anne, to the podcast.
Susan, thank you so much for having me. I am truly excited to be here, so thank you.
Well, we're so happy to have you. So just start off, can you tell me a little bit about Arudia and your team? Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah. So people ask me where the name comes from.
I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah. So it's a made-up word, but here's the thing, like any former lawyer, and by the way, I like to refer to my law practice as 11 very long years.
Okay.
But notwithstanding, I love the skills that I got, the critical thinking skills, the writing skills as a lawyer. But Arudia, the name comes from the combination of Latin words to teach and to support. And so what we do here at Arudia is teach our clients, help them learn about themselves, help them discover more about themselves, their strengths, their weaknesses, and how to become more self-actualized. And then we support them in that journey.
Wow. So what a perfect name for what you do. So I spent some time reading some of your stuff, and I thought it was so enlightening and empowering. So I'm excited to get a chance to talk to you about it here today. So one of the things that I read, you wrote that post-pandemic, we are experiencing a historic moment of change in terms of the workplace. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think many would agree that the pandemic accelerated the work from home. We were headed towards work from home. But I think what people haven't truly called out yet is the fact that well-being has been elevated, well-being and retention. So the appreciation of the impact of leadership on others, including the lowest person in the hierarchy, and truly the impact on everyone. My experience with my own clients, and I'm also involved in a number of volunteer activities, including, the American Bar Association, the Women's Bar Association. I have board positions. I'm leading the leadership and management lawyer committee of law practice for the ABA. But the focus on being well is really profound. We haven't been there before, I don't think.
I have to agree. I mean, I think there's so much more to it. So how does wellness impact company culture?
Well, if you don't have a well culture, you don't have retention. And this is another thing. The articles that I write, when I write about retention, people reach out to me. I mean, much greater numbers than any of the other articles, because everybody's trying to solve that problem. It's not just the quiet quitting, it's the actual quitting. And retention is a direct function of your culture, which is a function of leadership. So right before the pandemic, who knew? Even then, I would say I have measures to say how much leadership affects culture. So for example, if you use, hey, I'd recommend that you work at this place, Susan, because it's great. And we use that as a proxy for retention. What we know is that when you've got that, like 50% more people will stay at an organization. That's a huge number. So just again, focusing on retention just a moment, because all of my clients are struggling with getting good people. Everything costs more. They've got to pay more. They're struggling with budgets. They've still got to provide excellent client service. You know, people who are not taking care of themselves are not providing great service. But then there's a struggle about how do you do that, provide service, timely service, and make sure that your employees are well taken care of. And my theory there, I'll just jump in again. My theory there is that, yes, well-being is about having vacations and time off and, you know, getting a massage every once in a while, but it's actually really about having a well culture, going to work and feeling really valued and enjoying the work and finding it fulfilling.
So I read somewhere that company culture, you could compare it to the underlying personality and collective emotionality. I think maybe I took that from one of your articles. So do you agree with that? Like it's the personality and, you know, it's how everybody's feeling is what the culture is.
Yeah. And it's actually even almost like a little bit more than that. Like think about a marriage. There's you, your spouse, and then there's kind of the marriage or the relationship, almost like it's this third being. So, culture's got a conscious side, like, you know, we decide to have meetings on a certain day. These are our processes. You know, we're either sticklers, we're not. All of that is kind of conscious. But then there is the underlying emotion, our ability to collectively regulate, our stresses, you know, that emotionality is what really drives culture and what you have to manage if you want to create a well culture. So for example, if you have a group of people, and I'll just refer to them as affirmers, because if you take the assessment, you'll know what that is, who are driven by affiliation and connection. The shadow side of that, the fear-based side of that is like, hey, Susan, I'm afraid to have a difficult conversation for you. And then guess what happens? 6 months later, we haven't had that conversation. And you're wondering, like, what's wrong with Anne? And I'm kind of, you know, trying not to resent it, trying to say it doesn't make any difference. But then what happens is something else happens and I get upset and it like comes out in a really negative way. That's how conflict avoidance negatively affects culture.
So you would say, so it's funny because a lot of times when I think about company culture, you know, my knee-jerk reaction is to think about, okay, employee appreciation or, you know, doing these things that help employees feel good. And that's important, right? Having those things. But it sounds to me like what you say is that one of the drivers for a healthy, well culture is leadership within the organization. Is that right?
Yeah, no question. So it's like if I'm also like, here's another one of the shadows. If we talk about, you know, those people who are super hard charging, right? And they will do anything to get results. Like they're kind of great to have on your team, but if they don't manage their stress or their, what we call their shadow side and get super stressed out and push even harder, almost to the point of being bullies, then what you've got is people who are afraid of this person. Like, oh, I don't want to hurt. I don't want to upset Joe. I don't want to reveal that I made a mistake. That is not a healthy culture, right? So it doesn't matter if we have these, and here's the thing is that's when people get cynical. Oh yeah, this company cares about culture. They're having all these like appreciation days, or you get to take your birthday off or something like that. But oh, my manager is horrible. And even in our survey, what we saw is that how people felt about their team and their manager was actually even more important than leadership. The people around them, do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel mentored? Do they feel like they're learning?
So we talked about how a good culture affects retention, but I think I've read some stuff too, and I'm curious if you agree that it also good culture increases productivity. I saw a statistic that said that happy workers are 12% more productive. Unhappy workers are 10% less productive. And so Do you agree with that? Have you seen that when you're working with organizations, that the productivity goes up when people get a handle of this?
No question. In fact, I wrote an article called Solving the Performance Wellness Conundrum. And my theory there is, people think about life sort of as an either or, like, well, you can either have wellness or you can have high performance. But if you really believe that culture is what drives well-being, culture is actually also what drives performance. If you've got a healthy culture, a good culture, a culture where if I'm like running out of time, or if I'm really sick and I say, hey, Susan, I need some help on this, like before it's an emergency, because I'm not self-protective, I'm not worried about your reaction, then guess what? We have a higher performing culture. People feel safe and they feel more well. So yes, I completely buy that statistic, and I'm actually a little surprised it's not higher.
Okay. So we know now that culture is important, right? Especially post-pandemic, where we're all concerned about well-being, and culture is more than, employee appreciation. So let's say I'm a leader and I say, okay, I want to be a good leader and I want to make my team feel safe. I want to have a good culture. What do I do? Where do I start?
Well, I'd love for you to take our Leadership and Management Academy. So I'm going to make a shameless pitch for that.
Okay.
Where you get to learn more about yourself. You learn, here's what you do. The leaders who manage their shadow side, that stress side, will instill a sense of confidence even when things go terribly wrong, that together the team will prevail. So what that requires of you is to do something like take the actualized leader profile, learn about your strengths as a leader, and that's great, right? Like you're going to use those quite naturally, but then also learn what that shadow side, or that, Achilles heel is for yourself, so that you can then be aware, like, oh, you know what? When I have to deal with this kind of problem, I get stressed and I'm not 100% candid. Or when this kind of problem, and I'll just share one with you, probably have many animal lovers listening to this. When I have to call a vet who is not being easy to get a hold of to get either medication or get in or get a question answered, and I've had a couple of sick cats recently, and I'm getting like what feels like I could arguably say is the runaround. And from the front desk, because they don't know, I tell myself, I'm like, okay, this is not this person's fault. They are trying to help me. They don't understand because they're not the vet, like that, and that's okay. No judgment there, right? But like I do the self-talk ahead of time, so I'm not like the lunatic client that nobody wants to talk to. Like I don't want that. I don't want somebody to experience that ever. Certainly not experience that from me. So that's the thing, is it's learning the situations that cause you to turn into, from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde, or Miss Conflict Avoidant, whatever your Achilles heel is, and then preparing so that you're not letting that interfere with your effectiveness as a leader.
It's so funny because you talking about like, okay, you gave the example of going to the vet. When you're talking about these things, I automatically think about not just work, but dealing with my teenagers, and knowing, my triggers, or, knowing what my shadow side is, and knowing ahead of time, okay, I'm starting to feel this way, what is my strategy so that I can lead, or so that I can interact, with my most difficult clients, which are my teenagers. They're both in college now though, so it's a little different. But so this work is not just good for corporate culture, right? It sounds like it has a huge impact on your life, right? Or it can if you implement the principles.
Oh, no question. No question. Whether it's my husband, my stepson, friends, people you deal with. Here's the thing is, one of the things that I hope is that every client that goes through either an actualized leader training coaching session with me is that they understand, they recognize the shadows. So once you see it in yourself and you realize like, all right, you're not a crazy raving, whatever, then they can see it in others. And when people are, for example, rude to them or don't return phone calls or do things, like you can have more compassion. Like, all right, that person was in their shadow. They were stressed out. Like, the grace of forgiveness in that sense, or of understanding. And I will say that the longer I live, the more I appreciate how life is not always easy, right?
Right.
And just by way of example, coach, and I could say this about any number of clients, but hey, why don't you coach so-and-so? They're having this particular challenge at work. Then you get into the confidentiality of a coaching session and you realize that either one of their children is having a lot of medical issues, or they're going through a really ugly divorce, or their parents are really sick. And, we can all say, well, yeah, don't bring that to work. But I mean, how do you really make that happen? I mean, you can do your best, but there's still that undercurrent of stress. And so as a leader, if you can have those conversations, not like you're prying, but as support, that makes a difference. And being compassionate. That's the other thing that I've seen, is that leaders and managers are a lot more compassionate these days about and that's another thing that came out of the pandemic, I think, is a lot of people lost people. And so, or got really sick. So we're all sort of recognizing that, oh yeah, you do actually have a personal life. Like somehow it wasn't obvious before, right?
Well, I mean, I guess even also, we're recording this both from our home offices, and I have my blur on, so you can't necessarily see my messy basement, but we are actually interacting with people in their homes, right? Which I think also drives home the point that we have personal lives, and we're bringing all of that to work. Some people are better at compartmentalizing than others, but I love how you talk about the compassion. It's kind of like when you hear, like, don't judge somebody, on the outside. You never know what people are going through. You never know.
That's exactly right. And here's the other thing. In our Leadership Academy, 2 months ago, I did an interview with a client of mine who's an exceptional manager. And then we did a coaching demonstration. And what the topic was setting healthy professional boundaries at work, because many times people are promoted and then they are managing their former peers. Well, that's difficult. I would say in particular difficult for women. And then I did a coaching demonstration with her. And so in the debrief, and, we talked about it afterwards, she played someone who was having a real challenge with a sick spouse at home, and also having a hard time meeting her performance goals. Here's the thing, is if you have a healthy culture and you have trust with your team, people will come to you and say, you know what, I want to be doing this, but I'm only 70% here. Can we work out something? But if you're hiding it because you know that the conversation is going to be really uncomfortable, you not only have you damaged this person's well-being, you've damaged not their performance and sort of the team's performance, their ability to lead. So, and that's all created by what kind of leader you are, how accessible you are.
And so everyone has this different, so if I take the Actualized Leader framework, can you just tell me a little bit more about that, like how that works and how it would work working with you?
Sure, yeah. So the Actualized Leader framework was created by Dr. William Sparks, and it relies on the work of 4 great behaviorists, psychiatrists, psychologists. So you've got Abraham Maslow. So the idea of being self-actualized comes from his work. And we all want to be living at the apex of the pyramid. So we've satisfied our needs around physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging needs. We're getting recognition, but we are thriving and like loving our work and really enjoying our personal lives because of how we're dealing with our shadow side. So you're going to say, all right, well, what is that shadow side? So put a pin in that and then go to McClellan's contribution, which is in his work, he identified 3 motivations that we all have, or motive drivers. So affiliations, all humans want to connect. Power or control, or the ability to drive results. That one's a little harder to language because power and control are so loaded, especially when it comes to women. But, the ability to drive results, get projects over the finish line. And then lastly, achievement, which is about winning through technical expertise. So these are all defined terms. Now, if we look at Jung's work, Carl Jung, whose work is the basis of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which I'm also certified in, he's the first to have identified the shadow side. So the shadow side is the fear-driven side. So like truly when we go from being Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, when we are afraid of the outcome. So just taking affiliation, it's being connected. Like I've enjoyed meeting you. I've enjoyed connecting. But what if I have to tell you something really that feels uncomfortable or difficult? I might be in my fear of rejection shadow. Like I'm conflict avoidant. I'm fearing that you won't like me or something so that I don't tell you and I hold it on. So that's the shadow side. And so for the affirmer being in the shadow, it looks like sensitivity, indecision, being anxious, overly complacent, like, oh, I'm not going to rock the boat here, all of that kind of thing. Now, for the asserter who's about driving results, that's the power and control, it's about pushing too hard. Like, I'm not feeling professionally safe or personally safe for some reason, so I'm going to push even harder to get things done. And then that ends up, that's either like making decisions too quickly, being impatient, being rude, belligerent, like, again, driving people. But again, like paradoxically, and this gets to Viktor Frankl's contribution, like the more you're in the shadow, as Jung would say, you meet your destiny on the road you took to avoid it. So you actually bring about the circumstances that you don't want. Because, hey, if we're friends and I've got something I need to say to you, I actually think it builds the relationship for us to have a conversation about that rather than me like, sweeping it under the rug or avoiding it. Or maybe I even start avoiding you because I'm afraid to have the conversation.
So because I'm, if I'm an affirmer, I value relationships. I have a connection with you, but I don't want to tell you the bad things. I'm more likely to lose what I wanted. I think that's what you just said. Like I'm more likely to lose the relationship and what's important to me because of my shadow side. That's good stuff.
Yes.
But our shadow side never goes away, right? Like we never get rid of our shadow side. It's going to come out, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing, but that's where the self-awareness is, what I spoke about a little bit earlier, which is that if we can become aware, like, hey, these situations really trigger me. So let me, it's again, like I'm having to call my vet. I've already left 2 messages. I've sent a couple emails. I'm getting messages back that make me think, my lawyer brain saying like, okay, did you even read my message? That little bit of snark is shadow right there. But, knowing that that's touchy for me means that I like take a breath and I plan how I'm going to deal with it, And that's what great. We're not ever going to be free of our shadows, but it's embracing our shadow, knowing it, planning it, having a strategy. And then also in this actualized leader framework, there is, we get a score on the 9 attributes of actualized leaders and are able to, sort of see where we are and not only use them, be more objective so we don't take things personally, like in the moment, but then also just work, for example, on our objectivity or work on being present more or work on having more candor, And you'll notice, by the way, that I'm talking a lot about candor and about being an affirmer and all of that because I work with a lot of women leaders, a lot of women CEOs, a lot of women clients. And more women have higher scores or higher drives on the relationship side.
That's so interesting because I took your test. I took the shortened. I'm sure it's a shortened version of the actualize leader, and I'm an affirmer. So I guess I'm in good company. And so more women are affirmers, and that means that we have a shadow side. Can you just tell me in particular, like how does that? The fact that women are more likely to be affirmers affect their leadership style and like what effects does that have in the workplace, especially specific to women?
Yeah. So, and just to take like a step back and even finish off like the framework. So remember, there's 3 drives, affiliation and then power and then achievement, which is about winning through technical expertise.
Okay.
So objective, critical thinking. More men are achievers, more women affirmers. Interestingly, and there's a reason I'm refreshing us, is that asserters, men and women are asserters equally. So here's the challenge. So a couple of challenges. First off, I find that in working with my female clients who are more driven by relationships, even if they're intensely self-actualized, meaning that they're not in their shadow very often. They're very aware of their shadow, and they choose to have difficult conversations or make difficult choices anyway. But they have to work at it more. So a lot of the coaching is around kind of like, I have one client who said to his own CEO, kind of like, I know you want to be nice, but you're being really not nice to the rest of us who have to put up with this person on our leadership team who is really, really ineffective. So sometimes it's framing, speaking to the affirmer drive, like, yeah, you're being nice to this one person who is a drag on everybody, but the rest of us are like, we're dying here, The other thing, and the reason that it's important to recognize that that women also have an equal drive for getting things done, pushing things over the finish line, is because you want to make sure, especially if you have a strong drive for affiliation and for power or control, that you don't end up falling into the trap of being in both shadows at the same time, because what that looks like is being passive aggressive. And that is the thing that I hear more women accused of. And so what it is like, well, I want what I want, but I want you to like me. And so again, like in the coaching, and this is the coaching that I give to women all the time, is it's like, all right, you're going to have a difficult conversation. First, we start with, what do you want to get out of the conversation? Or what do you want the other person to walk away with? So, okay, now that we have that, then we can plan out the conversation. And what I always say is, you know what, being direct, no drama, taking a breath ahead of time, those are going to be the best conversations. If you're anxious about it, you're going to just make the other person anxious. It's like if you're anxious around, a dog or, a puppy or, a skittish cat, then you make them more anxious, right? But if you're confident and you're saying, hey, we got to talk about this issue and figure out how to resolve it, then the conversation goes much better. And in our win-win conversation model, the first step is being able to state things like stating facts very neutrally and without judgment. So usually the key is, all right, come up with your opening statement. And then it's a little bit like, well, everybody kind of knows there's a problem here, but then you can get into problem solving mode. Now, sometimes, and this is another place where you have to make sure your affirmer shadow doesn't get in the way, is when you're having the conversation, the person might be defensive and, you might throw a few pot shots over the bow, so to speak, and you just ignore them because that detracts from solving the problem. So if you can stay focused on solving the problem, and ignore the pot shots, then the other person doesn't distract you, right?
Right.
Once you start dealing with that, you're not dealing with, a lack of accountability or underperformance or a difficult issue. So that's actually very, very critical. So those are the kind of issues that come up a lot with women. The other thing that I would say in my coaching of women is that, a man and a woman could say the exact same thing, and well received from a man, not so well received from a woman. So I would just say that women have to be more effective at using some of the communication tools. Now, this does not mean that you're going to, make everything flowery and butter people up. I do not ever subscribe to being inauthentic. That just doesn't work. And you feel kind of smarmy about it anyway. But using the win-win conversation model, which is about staying in that problem-solving mindset, taking into account the person's needs, being patient, by the way, not getting into your asserter shadow, which can manifest as impatience while you're having these conversations, is really important. Using coaching skills, which I say is not like coaching like a football coach, but it's like coaching like an executive coach. So asking thoughtful questions so that you're partnering with your colleagues to solve the most difficult problems.
Wow. So that was a lot that you just said. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and it's funny because I think about, how certainly with some conversations, we're planning ahead of time. I know I have to have this difficult conversation. You're talking about the win-win model, but I imagine some of this is a skill so that like once you get some of it down and you work it out with a coach, you're able to, it makes the even on the spot conversations go a little bit more. It sounds like it's a real skill that you can develop.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to be terribly shy. I'll just own that. And got a lot more confident through time. So that's it. It's building the confidence. And when we look in the Actualized Leader framework at the confidence sequence, people who think objectively, who feel courage and speak with candor are a lot more confident. So for affirmers, what I see is they're relatively low in objectivity and candor. And if you can intentionally work on being more objective so that you're not taking things personally, then, and you just train yourself to think that way, then nothing feels personal. In fact, when I do coaching demonstrations, which everybody gets in character and the people in our academy love them. And we actually set up something in our portal where people can go back because they always want the how, which is what you're asking. I always get feedback, which oh, you were so calm, that person was kind of rude to you. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, you just as a leader, you have to ignore that stuff. Now, I always caveat that with, I'm not saying you have to put up with something that you think has crossed the line, and everybody's going to make that choice for themselves. But just know that if you can ignore some of the initial grumbling, you'll actually probably get to a good conversation, and it does become easier over time.
That sounds like it. All right. So as we're talking about this, I'm not only thinking about this in my own life, but I'm thinking about leaders that I know, and I'm thinking, wow, this would be really great for them. But more to the point, maybe as a team. So I'm curious, do you work with teams of people, and how does that work?
Yeah. I work with teams. I work with boards. I work with leadership teams. And so anybody who basically comes to me we're not quite gelling, we've had the team together. I mean, I have a program in a week from tomorrow. We're not quite gelling. There's something, what can I do? And so here's the thing is, actually the whole process will walk you through, your whole team will generate what they think you all as a team, what we as a team need to do. So the process is essentially all right, come to me, tell me what your lay of the land is, what you want to see happen. Let me brainstorm with you and design a program that's going to get you from point A to point B. Sometimes it includes some coaching after the fact, but it's all, I actually prefer an emergent style of design. Here's where I think it's going to go, but let's take this first step and see where you are, and then let's figure out, what the next steps are. We also work with a lot of clients who are on a budget, so our leadership academy is really good for them because they can get a lot of content and a year's worth of leadership development, for a pretty reasonable price. And, we'll help people to, if you got a whole team coming, let's make a deal. But it's really about solving the problem and creating an experience that gets the team, not just that I'm telling them something, yes, they're learning about themselves, they're learning about each other and their new skills and new communication and coaching skills, but they're generating we need to do this differently. And then everybody's bought in. Because oftentimes what happens is that a leader will be very, very conscientious and want to do it all themselves. But no, this is a group experience. It has to be collaboratively generated. That can be hard for people that are very, very high achievers, both in the actualized leader sense, meaning that their Achilles heel is doing it all themselves and not asking for help or micromanaging. We all know people like that. But also people are used to getting things done at a high level, can also be somewhat impatient about letting others struggle through it and learn. So that's actually something that I see a lot with challenges that people have in terms of embracing being a leader is letting others struggle a little bit and learn and fail even, and learn from their mistakes. Not like the failure was a disaster. I mean, you do step in before that, but as like, let's learn from this and let me support you in that.
Right. And a real tool for collaboration. So I've heard you talk a couple times about your Leadership Academy, and I would love to hear some more about that, because you said it's just getting started and it runs for a year. Is that what you said? So can you tell me some more about that?
It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Okay.
So we're actually, our last session of our 12th core training is this week. We put over 700 people through it. Our next core training starts on April 11th for our spring session, and then we have fall starts in October. So what's the core training? The core training is 10.5 hours of our core training, problem-solving style with the KAI, actualized leader. Everybody takes the assessments, and then we do 2 sessions of C-suite communication skills for everyone, and then the last session is coach like a CEO. And then you get access to a portal, what we call an all-access pass portal with all the recordings, courses, other resources. But then we do an hour's worth of webinars each month. They're usually in half-hour segments, so it might be 2 webinars. But I've been experimenting more with doing interviews and then doing a coaching demonstration. So actually the topic for this month is positive accountability. And then I have a client who is hilarious, so it should be fun. She's a lawyer. She is going to play someone that is kind of slippery and doesn't want to be held accountable, and I'm going to coach her through that. So what I do is I then end a little bit early so people can ask questions. There's usually a lot of giggles and stuff too, so it's fun. But the point is to make the leadership training accessible, and you get, after the core training, which is a little less than 2 months, you get 12 months worth of access to the webinars, and the other materials and everything.
Wow. And so this is remote, right? So people come from all over?
Yeah. In fact, our guy from, our one client from Alaska, where it's, which means it starts at 6:30 a.m. for him. He is always the first person on.
Thank you.
I know. But we have a really great group. We have people from all across the country in a number of different fields. So that part is really fun too, because we always have we do it meeting style, so people ask questions, but then we also have breakouts so they can practice the exercises and, talk through some of their challenges. And my colleague Cynthia Schaefer does an amazing job of creating groups. So, it's good. We get a lot of positive feedback about the whole experience.
Well, it sounds really great. And I imagine it can be really helpful to learn with others about this, and to help actually develop some of that compassion, empathy when we see it in the people that you're working with, and everybody is motivated, I suppose, to become more self-actualized. So it sounds really great. So I know you said that you have some other stuff coming up too. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So March is the month of free programming for us. We have 4 free programs to help people become more aware of our work. And it's also a little bit of a gift to our clients who are really on a budget. We encourage them to send their teams. So this Friday from 3 to 4 o'clock Eastern, we have a program that's called Upgrade Your Personal Operating System. And that is based on the free version of the Actualized Leader Profile. So we encourage people to come to that, do a review if you've been before. On Wednesday the 13th, between 2 and 3 o'clock, we have a program called Attract Opportunities, Create Your Personal Brand. So you'll get your personal branding workbook that I created, and then you'll get walked through how to do that. On the 20th, between 2 and 3, we've got Build Your Executive Presence, and that's going to be a little bit, include some shadow presence versus executive presence and how to make some choices. And then on the 21st, Practical Steps to Improve Culture.
So how does somebody find this? How do I sign up for these fabulous March free courses?
Just go to our website, which is Arudia, ARUDIA.com, and then go to upcoming events and just click on the event and you can register.
And you mentioned for one of the events, I could take that free assessment tool. I can find that on your website too?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I'll just say what it is right now. If you want to see how your leadership style affects culture, go to atpfree.com and take the assessment. You'll find out if you're an affirmer, asserter, achiever, and how you are when you're at your best, your shadow side, and then what it looks like when you are kind of your input into the culture. I mean, this is a very basic version because there's a full version of all of these tools, and then also how the shadow negatively affects culture.
Well, that sounds great. I'll definitely, I'll definitely take a look at that. So, I like to ask people, because I think that this is such an insightful question, and not to call us out for being women of a certain age, but is there advice that you would give to your younger self?
Yes. I mean, a lot of advice. The good thing is that, I've always brushed my teeth and flossed and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But other than that, truly, not being attached to things working out in a particular way. So who would have known when I was starting law school that I would practice for 11 years, leave, start my own business, and, be doing this kind of work. So being open to your career, taking twists and turns. I mean, I do a lot of career coaching too. So I've definitely seen other people's twists and turns because in some ways, 30 years after law school, it looks just like, oh yeah, that was all planned. It all looked really good. It all made sense, And I will say, I do poke fun at, having been to law school and my legal career a little bit, because, not everybody thinks tax lawyers are the most fun in the world. And that was my area. But I did so much writing. And I'm really grateful for the training and the critical thinking skills that I gained by having to apply them. So everything that you do is somehow going to add to you being like, a fuller person, having all of these experiences. And, sometimes when things like you want this door to open and you get frustrated because it's not opening, then another door opens and that's even better. So it's a little bit like, if you marry the wrong person, then you're not around to marry the right person. And none of us want that. So recognizing and I think trusting that the universe does somehow support you is critical. And it's something that as a woman of a certain age that I have definitely learned.
Yeah, that's good advice. I like to think that there is no waste, right? There is no waste. All right. So we ask all of our guests on our Think Factory podcast this one question. What keeps you up at night?
Other than my cats jumping on me. Here's the thing. I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night because I actually have gotten to a place where I'm self-actualized enough where I sleep really well, meaning that I don't worry. I really want self-actualization for everybody. And so sometimes I have a client who's really struggling with it. And I just want them to get through it so much. I care deeply about my clients. And so I will, I'll go out for a walk and I'll be thinking about oh geez, how can I help this person? What would be another way to help them, and if I feel like they've given up on themselves, that I feel bad about,
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like, your care and your compassion for your clients really stands out, and I'm sure makes you terrific in the stuff that you do. So it has been a pleasure getting to know you, and I'm so happy that you were here to join us for today's podcast. And be sure to check out the other Women's Roundtable podcasts so you can learn how women think big and grow their business. Thanks so much, Anne.
Thank you.